Thank you for joining us in today's discussion that is centered on inclusion. Big Brothers Big Sisters defines inclusion as fostering a sense of belonging by centering, valuing, and amplifying the voices, perspectives, and styles of those who experience more barriers based on their identities. My name is Tanya Gibson, and I'll be your moderator for today's panel. I'm so delighted that you joined this panel around intentionality, centering and amplifying voices and perspectives that have experienced barriers based on their identities. Oftentimes, we automatically center this solely on people of color without looking at other aspects of diversity that may not be visible or outwardly known. But before we jump into today's conversation, I'd like to welcome in our panelists to join in this conversation. And each of our panelists will introduce themselves to our audience. I'd like to start with our first panelist and ask her to introduce to our audience. So Becky, would you introduce yourself to our audience today?
Yes, so grateful to be here today. I'm Becky Hatter, and I'm the president and CEO of Big Brothers Big Sisters of Eastern Missouri.
Welcome. Thank you so much, Becky. And next we'll have Roberto.
Good evening. My name is Roberto Rivera. I am the executive director of the Alliance for the Seventh Generation, and we help to create thriving educational ecosystems by, for, and with youth. And we do that by combining research and practice. And so I look forward to kind of combining the research and practice and giving a little praxis for you all tonight.
Well, we can't wait to hear it, Roberto. Thank you. And next we'll have Namba.
Hi, good evening. Hello, my name is Namba Chicarello Yate. I am of the Diné Nation, and I live in Arizona. I am a mother of a recipient of the program. My son, Elliot, he's 13 years old right now, and just really appreciate being here and being invited here to attend and participate in this. And I'm giving you a little bit and sharing a little bit of how we benefit from this program. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Namba. And last but certainly not least, Dennis.
Aloha, everyone. I'm Dennis Brown, CEO of Big Brothers Big Sisters Hawaii. Very privileged to be here to join you and both learn as well as share some of my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our panelists. So as I mentioned, we're going to jump right into the conversation. So this panel is entitled Building Trust, Rooted in Authenticity and Intentionality. And so I would like to address all of you as panelists. You've all shared a little bit about who you are in terms of your identity, location. We're all diverse and rooted in that trust and authenticity. I think for our audience today, I'd love for each of you to talk a little bit first about inclusion. You heard me share with our audience that inclusion is about fostering a sense of belonging, and each of you have a different perspective when it comes to that creation of inclusion in an authentic way. So I'd love for each of you to share a little bit what it means for you to be included in your community, as a leader, as a parent, and all of those things that may intersect. And so who would like to jump in first to tell us more about what it means to feel included?
I can go first. This is Namba. I can go first. So how we are and how I feel with being included in this program, Big Brothers Big Sisters, is that we live in a rural area. We live on the Navajo Nation out in Arizona, and so we are widespread on a vast part of the of land. However, a lot of the programs that are like Big Brothers and Big Sisters, these common popular programs that benefit children like this, they're along the border towns, is what we call it. They're border towns, and it's a long commute. It's a distance to drive to these locations, and for those programs to be offered to us in those locations, it's hard for us to be like a routine participant. And so I'm glad that right now where I'm situated, where we live, we are able to be and participate in the Big Brothers Big Sisters. I really wish that there would be more offices, more locations that are reaching out to the inner part of the reservation, because my son, we are just one of how many tribal members and children that that could benefit from this program. So I'm very glad and fortunate that I was able to know Big Brothers and Big Sisters exist, and I only knew that because I grew up in a metro area, Albuquerque, New Mexico. I grew up there, and that's how I come to know Big Brothers Big Sisters.
Yes, thank you for that, Amba. That having a voice of our parents, right? And when you talk about being included, I can hear the passion behind wanting to have every child be matched with a caring mentor. And so I'd love to have our other panelists also share their thoughts around what it means for you in your perspective of being included. And so, Roberto, I saw you chiming in and nodding your head. What are some of your thoughts about being included?
No, I love, this whole conversation on inclusion. It really kind of reminds me of the slogan for the disability rights movement, which is, nothing about us without us, right? And so this notion that if, folks are going to be making decisions that are going to impact our lives, whether that be policies or programs or plans of action, we need to be included. We need to participate. We need to have ownership in that process. I also think about, Dr. King. You see us here, we're representing different nations, different tribes, different races, different abilities, generations. And King really, talked about this idea of the beloved community, right? Which is this intergenerational, multicultural, multiracial, folks with different ability, coming together around the shepherd's table, if you will, and really participating, looking out for one another's needs, sharing power, right? And so inclusion for me is kind of decentralizing power and allowing everyone to have a voice, to be a unified, diverse choir, if you will. It's not a program, it's not a initiative, it's a way of life, and it's something that we desperately need in this diverse, pluralistic democracy that we're trying to participate in here in the United States. So, yeah.
Well, I think with that, Roberto, we can probably wrap this up right now, but we have more to discuss, definitely. And I want to give each of our other panelists some time also to share their thoughts. And, I feel like I want to go directly to Dennis, because Dennis, Roberto was mentioning some of the cultural significance that I think Hawaii and your community can share. And then we will go right into Miss Becky, because I know she has some words of insight as well. So Dennis, what are your thoughts around inclusion? What does that mean to you to be included?
Well, to me, I think, and thank you so much for having us, and for the question, and Roberto for your words and referencing the Pacific Islands in particular, where I've grown up and always lived. For me, being welcomed just in general, there's kind of a passive and an active aspect to it to me. Passively, to be just welcomed as you are. And we welcome everyone as they are, for who they are. And then more actively, not to be treated as I felt once upon a time, being of mixed race in my own community, moving here actually from the mainland United States, as kind of an outsider and almost invisible. And so to not treat people as being invisible, and for us to use all the words, because words are powerful, and actions that denote respect, presence, and acceptance as an equal in terms of spirit and humanity. And to be considered and treated as someone who has something to offer, to contribute to the whole society, to be a respected part of the group, and not as an outsider. And I think lastly is to have one's individuality recognized as a strength, something that makes a person unique for who they are, as opposed to being seen as different for who they're not. So kind of in a nutshell, that's how I look at it, in a more of a melting pot atmosphere like Hawaii is, where we really have no single majority race or ethnic group, racial or ethnic group. You know, it's got its challenges, and so I think it's wonderful in some ways that no one's really a clear majority and is dominant, but at the same time, like in a family, you know, sibling rivalry and other things enter into the picture because there are just so many different points of view and so many different cultures that need to merge. But I think the one universal thing is to really be welcoming to everyone for who they are. Thanks.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more, Dennis. Thank you for sharing that. And Becky, what are your thoughts around inclusion and being included? Love to hear from you.
Well, first of all, again, thanks very much. But I think the panelists have all really given everyone the best advice. I mean, what is it and how do you do it? So thank you. I would just come to it as the CEO of Big Brothers Big Sisters of Eastern Missouri, and not always just having the definition, but how do you operationalize it day in and day out in all of the work? And so we're very much on a journey. I appreciate, Roberta, you bringing up white supremacy culture, anti-bias, anti-racism, and dismantling. And so that's where we are in Eastern Missouri. You'll hear a little bit later that I've been around for about 32 years. I'm clearly white. I've been in this position as CEO in St. Louis for 27 years. So I personally am a part of the problem, have built some of these structures that have not always been inclusive. But we set a new sight for ourselves, not only so that we would be better humans in this world, but certainly that we would be better champions and friends and advocates for our staff and those that we serve. So it starts with inclusion. It requires deep humility. It requires listening and not trying to, have the debate with them in your head when someone is saying do something different. So I just really, everything that was said around the definition, I think is spot on, and now operationalize it and becoming who we want to be as Big Brothers and Big Sisters for all people is the work that we're in, and I know other colleagues are in.
Yes, I know, Becky, you said everyone already said everything, and you framed that and led me right down the next question. So thank you. Insightful words for our audience today. So hopefully you were taking notes. Dennis, I'm going to need you to just maybe photocopy your notes and send those to me, because as a lifelong learner, that resonated with me, all of your points. So I just want to thank all of you for what you've shared thus far. So I'm ready to dig in a little bit deeper. So hopefully you're here with me for the ride. So I want to talk a little bit, and I think, Becky, you said it very well about, there are problems and challenges, but how do we operationalize it? What are we doing to know that we need to dismantle some of those barriers, right? And in the conversations around building trust and having that be authentic, that's the big question of the hour, I think, in this panel is, okay, so how do we do that, right? We know that there are some challenges that we have in our communities across the country, but okay, what are we doing to build that trust and be authentic about it? And how do we do that in a way that extends a natural progression of being thoughtful, being a learner, and creating relationships with individual communities? And so I want to kind of unpack that with each of you in your area of expertise. So Roberto, I'm going to lean in on you, my friend, for this question around building that trust and authenticity. As a researcher, as an advocate, centering your work around young people, they're so in tune with the desires, right, of what they want, and more so probably than, I'll call myself out and say the older folk or elders, as our DEI consultant always reminds me, right? They're so in tune with what they want. But as an adult, I can find some joy in the fact that they're brave and honest and have courage of self-expression, something that I'm still working on, right? I've kind of gotten to this comfort zone and am not as brave and courageous. So from your aspect and background, Roberto, what methods would you suggest to give us, to the adults, to make authentic connections with young people in a way that feels welcoming and builds that trust and authenticity? Because we know they're the bridge builders, right? We're along for the ride. How do we build that authentic connection of trust with our young people?
No, it's an excellent question, and thank you for giving me a chance to answer it. You know, I really think there's a lot of wisdom in Indigenous leaders and elders, and I just want to lift up the words of Lila Watson, who is an Indigenous leader. She's an activist, and you know, this really kind of guides my work and serving other people. She says, "If you come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, let us journey together." And so to me, that quote just captures so much, because when we're talking about, you know, education or mentorship, you know, we're not just talking about the littles are the ones that are benefiting and being transformed. The reality is that the bigs are also being transformed just as much, if not more, right? And so as I reflect on that, as I reflect, you know, on education coming from the Latin term educere, which means to bring out that which is already there, I think a lot of this is learning to build a relationship that allows us to see the cultural beauty and brilliance in our youth, and really creating experiences where we can reflect that back to them. There's a lot of healing and a lot of transformation that can happen with, you know, journaling and meditation and prayer. But I believe that some levels of healing and transformation only come in being an authentic relationship with someone from a different background than us, from a different generation than us, right? And so as I kind of reflect on that, and, you know, being a scholar, I see the research, and it says that adolescents in the US, they have to have these positive developmental relationships with adults. BBBS is standing in the gap and helping to make that happen. But the research also suggests that only 19% of youth have that positive developmental relationships, right? And so it takes effort. And I see big brothers and big sisters starting to really create this movement that is preparing elders and yelders. I call it, the young folks can be elders too, right? And serving the younger youth. You know, I hear about some of the work of, you know, y'all are doing in high school. I love it. But, you know, so that's some kind of high level. I think really practically is, you know, we got to be asset based. So I love asking questions to my, you know, mentees. You know, what are you passionate about? What are your dreams? And when we're journeying with youth in this reciprocally transformative way, then those questions come back to me. And I have to be open and vulnerable about what I'm passionate about and what my dreams are. And I think that real authentic connection happens when we start really meeting and holding each other accountable to going after these dreams. And that journey, it shifts us from just existing to really living, in my opinion.
Wonderful, Roberto. I'm getting so much from this panel. I'm going to need to make sure I take a notepad down soon, because I'm missing it. But I'm so glad this is recorded for our attendees, so you can watch this on demand and play it back. So much that you said resonated with me, Roberto. And I saw our friend Dennis nodding along. And so Dennis, this question is actually for you, and a lot of what Roberto said, I think, will resonate for you and your community. As a leader, you are, you know, in Hawaii. I'd like to know, from a standpoint of being a leader, where you have to make those connections from a variety of different aspects, whether it be staff who are then having to make those authentic connections for the matches that they make, or community members that you're talking with to bring them on board and learn more about our work. We call what Roberto was talking about, right, JEDI. That's our framework, right? Justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. That is our authentic path, being an innovative alternative to the juvenile justice system. Being a JEDI-focused youth empowerment organization isn't new. We're just giving the language to frame it, right? So I'd love to know, Dennis, from your aspect, right, as we evolve as an organization in our language and how we speak about who we are as an organization, and that concept of JEDI being who we are. How are you able to share our work in a way that is authentic and is JEDI focused, and allow people to come along to know that we're about empowering our young people? What are some of the things that you're doing in your community?
Yeah, well, thanks again for that question. It's there's a risk. There's some, I think there's some not just challenges, but we have to be bold because we don't know it all. This is new. I'm of that generation that grew up a long time ago. I think Becky and I are contemporaries to a degree, and so, like she said, we're part of the problem, the original problem, and we're certainly learning, and we're trying to get our staffs and our board members even to come to the realization that this is not only important, but it's critical. And so, one of the first things I always think about, and I talk about these days, is we as leaders and our employees need to be the first authentic examples. I mean, you can't, right? You've got to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And to do that, we've got to be educated. So panel discussions such as this one, some of the trainings that we have with our national organization and elsewhere outside of this, webinars and things are give us that greater ability to, as an organization, to be able to represent our organization, Big Brothers Big Sisters, as Jedi focused in a credible way. And I think what's really important too is not just walking the walk, but creating that culture within our organizations and within our people, right? Because it's easy to talk about and then walk away and say, "Oh, that was interesting," But how do we instill that this is a cultural movement, a cultural change that we need to do within our organization? I'm just so excited about it, about the whole Jedi idea. It's something that I've kind of wondered, when is Big Brothers Big Sisters going to take that next step from just the typical mentoring model we've done for almost 120 years, and look at the broader issues in the community and how we can deal with those. The second thing I think about is our agency has found that forming partnerships with other organizations. We've got a great one here in Hawaii called We Are Oceania, working with the Micronesian population, because it's a huge issue for them. When you think about, we hear in the national news, our U.S. mainland border into the U.S. We have one here too, where Micronesians have come to Hawaii thinking and feeling and believing that it was going to be a much better world for them, and they get here and they're treated horribly by the people we have here already, unfortunately, because they're so different. And people feel threatened by that, I think. So, for us to be able to work with organizations is not only a way for us to help serve more children and youth and families, but a way for us to learn more about how to work with them, how to connect with them, rather than, as was said before, not going in saying, "Hey, we're the great folks who are going to come in here and help you and change your world, for the better." But how can we do that? And how do we learn from you what you need and what will work to change your position within our community for the better? And that's not only given us added awareness about the families and the youth themselves and how to work with them, but it's also provided access to other community leaders in the community and given us, again, another form of credibility that, hey, we're doing this. We're extending beyond, because cultures such as Micronesian, I hear in some, even our native Hawaiian culture, is not really one that sees, use the term giving or even loaning their child to someone else, to a stranger, which is what our model is, right? You bring someone up from the outside to be a big brother or big sister. That's not native to their way of doing it. No, they take care of their own. So it's a little bit foreign for them to do that. So how do we do that in a less threatening way? And by being able to share and show them in a non-threatening way what we have to offer. And it's things about what everyone has said already. This is a relationship, and relationships occur in every culture and across every form. And every person really can benefit from positive relationships, strong relationships. So that's been a big one for us. And it gives us an opportunity, as we've started to do, and I use Jedi all the time now when I talk about Big Brothers Big Sisters, because I'm asked to speak a lot, because my personal story is I was the very first little brother served in Hawaii 57 years ago, and I became the CEO 22 years ago, and now I'm the longest serving CEO in our history, as well as having been our first client. So I have a platform. I'm asked to speak by our United Way all the time. I'm the most requested speaker on our island anyway, and even on the neighbor islands I've flown over, because when they hear that story, they say, hey, can you come and talk to us about that? So I have a platform, and now I'm able to expand that beyond just my one-to-one experience with my big brother, Henry Sumida, which was a lifetime relationship until he passed away in 2011 at 80 years old. But to go now and say, our mission is bigger than that. It's really bigger than that. And the Jedi focus is something that's real and something that we're sincere about. And so, I think that in a nutshell is kind of this new emphasis on Jedi is an opportunity for us to actually take the lead in our community in this area, because I don't hear anybody else really talking about it in those terms.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Dennis. So I think we all learned a little bit more about your story. So we'll have to do another vignette with just Dennis to learn more about your story being a part of our program in both of those arenas, right? As a little, now as a leader from the organization. And so I'm going to turn to Becky, and I'm going to brag on Becky for a moment. In our relationship, we were introduced through a mutual colleague who I think saw in both of us our passion for Jedi, right? We weren't calling it that, but I think they just saw our synergy. And I think your authenticity, right? Your ability to trust that your words are going to hit home because they're honest and they're impactful, right? Has always stood out to me. And as I watched you hear Dennis's story, Becky, I thought, she's got her own story to tell and share about how you were able to make those connections in your community. And you kind of, gave us a little snippet in your introduction about how long you've been in your community and coming in as an outsider. So I'd love for you to share for our audience more about how you've been able to make meaningful connections in your community and been doing it for decades and going strong, and maybe share with us, some of the challenges that you've experienced or the successes and the wins that you've had.
So before I do that, Dennis, my goodness, that is one of the best stories I've ever heard. And you just gave us just a piece of it, the beginning and the end. So I'm amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
This is a really kind of hard one for me to figure out. And so I'll tell you why it's a little bit difficult for me to answer the question, what did you do? How did you do it? It's probably instructive to know that I grew up in a small town of 800 people in Louisiana, to 15 to 20 cousins within running distance and fighting distance of each other. We had horses and animals, and, we were allowed to just kind of run wild, right? In the countryside, right? And in addition to that, I grew up with a family that was somewhere between educators, politicians, artists, and entrepreneurs. And so all of that mix, we eat gumbo in Louisiana. So that gumbo of personalities and access and gets in you. So so I naturally grew up in that space. That said, talk to people, visit with them, listen to them, ask questions. My dad would wake every morning when he'd wake us up, he would ask us things like crazy things like, how are you going to school today? Are you going on a helicopter or a airplane, and why? And what's your goal today? So I just had this very eclectic kind of upbringing, which brings to me deep curiosity. My husband is like, do you have to ask so many questions? Do you have to be curious about everything? And so I think that natural sense of being exposed to so many folks in so many different places, and then this deep sense of curiosity creates conditions to build community and trust, which is the which is a priority of our agency. Now, I want to just be clear that we don't always do it well. I don't always do it right? So, I really love to talk about where I stumble more than I talk about where I'm being successful. But for the purpose of everyone else wanting to know what were some of the things that you did, I just think it's important to, first of all, is just show up and want to be with community. And for all of the things that we've been saying, is just sit and listen and learn and be grateful. There's so much that we all have to share, but there's no story that I would like to tell more than I would like to listen to someone else's story. And so I think that I'm kind of naturally in that upbringing, knew to show up in that community. I was mindful of that this was their community, that they did have answers, that they did have things to do. I've never walked into a space and as a quid pro quo, I'm here to get something. I'm here to learn something. I'm here, would you be my advisor? So when I got here 27 years ago, that's what I did. I just was, a new kid in town. I had this Southern accent in a Midwestern city, which was kind of interesting to begin with. So I just walked around town. I just made telephone calls. I found out where our families were living, where they were not living. I was finding out who cared about these issues, and I just set a lot of appointments. And I just went and asked a lot of questions. I've just also learned over time, whether it's with community or whether it's with donors, to be very patient. And for those folks that know me well would think, you don't have any patience at all, Becky. That's true to a degree, but in other places I'm deeply patient. And even with donors, I usually don't rush things, and I always ask permission. So if I'm about to ask a donor for it, I will ask permission to ask before I ask. If I am wanting to go to a church, I'll call the pastor in advance and ask, can I come? So I think respecting people and understanding you're coming into their world and things that they care about, you must have respect and dignity and know that you need to be invited. So some of those values have been instilled in me, and I'm grateful for those.
Well, I'm grateful that you shared those, because I think we should all honor those, highlight them, underline, underscore all of that, because that's really what inclusion and being authentic is all about, and building trust. And so thank you. As a great segue for Namba, I'd love for you to join as a parent in our program. And you mentioned your son. You had the ultimate trust that you extended to Big Brothers Big Sisters, and allowing us to have the fortune and honor of being a part of your family, right? And you've mentioned a little bit about your community, and we heard Dennis talking about the Micronesian community and not feeling welcome and having to build that trust within the community. I think we've kind of heard that thread in our other panelists. As a parent, you have to place that ultimate trust in us to make sure that we are placing you with, as Dennis mentioned earlier, a stranger who I now know through your story is a part of your family. But can you take us to that time and share with our audience, what is it like from the perspective of a parent building that ultimate trust in Big Brothers Big Sisters to allow your family to become a part of our family? Talk to us about that relationship that you've built with Big Brothers Big Sisters over the years.
Okay. Thank you for the information that you all have provided, and your passion about what you do and the role you play. Because I'm sorry, but when you say trust, it's hard coming from where I'm sitting.
It's okay. Take your
I
time.
was fortunate enough to be raised and have that exposure to a different way of life that is here on the reservation, as opposed to somebody who's raised here. And so I was just making a conversation with Sarah the other day, who's with Big Brothers and Big Sisters, and we were talking about trust and the trust that how does it play a role here? How do we get that trust to be here? Because I told her, you know what, Sarah, it goes farther back than what we are doing here. Because at my dinner table, we're talking about people who have come here, non-natives, companies, people who want to come here on the Navajo Nation, and there was a mention of benefiting from it somehow, like a personal benefit, rather than trying to do outreach to better benefit the people here on Navajo Nation, but benefiting for themselves. I think Big Brothers and Big Sisters, with all the good intentions that it has, and the big that we have, Jose, he's amazing. He's very curious, and he's very curious. He wants to know what Elliott is about, where he comes from, what we do. What we do, like, not really in depth, but like I'm able to share with him because I'm comfortable with him, and because he wants to know, I'm able to share with him some of the culture, the cultural, like the ceremonies that we partake in, or the traditions that we have, or like, for instance, the other day I was telling Jose about that we're going to butcher. That's in our culture, that's what we do every day. That's how we live. And it's so having that open mind and having that curiosity was very beneficial to having that trust. So I'm glad that he's like that, and it makes me happy. It makes me feel good that he wants to know my son, and he wants to know where my son comes from. And when you have that support, and that outweighs all those, it can outweigh all those negative things, those things that we have discussion about. My son would be talking about how his day was, and how that, and then when he grows up, he's going to have some wonderful, great memories of what he did, and maybe someday, one day, he's gonna do what excuse me, I forget your name, I apologize. How you've grown up, and you were a recipient of the program, and how he's gonna give back to children, young children too, and maybe benefit through them, and bring to them and show them how what the program did for him, so I'm looking forward to all the information that you provided, and seeing that spread here. It would be so beautiful. And I like what you advocate for, and really up until recently, it really felt like we were forgotten. We don't see a lot of programs here. There's small little bit community programs like Dene Youth, and they have an after school program, but it's very, very limited. They only accept a few bit of children into their program, and it's not widespread. As far as it's really hard to get to those children that are out in more rural areas of the Navajo Nation. And if they could provide transportation for those students. I think they could reach more. So I just wanted to talk about that kind of trust that could be a barrier here on the Navajo Nation, and how we can get over those, get beyond, past those barriers, and start being positive across the Navajo Nation and reaching out across the Navajo Nation.
Namba, thank you for your vulnerability. I know.
I'm glad that there's a program here that is new and has a genuine benefit for the kids, for our children, for our generation, the next generation. That, you know, and I hope that it trickles to the next and to the next and keeps on in a positive way, so that we can come to a dinner table where we're thriving with happiness and joy and beauty. So thank you for allowing me that, but I'm sorry if I went a little bit off track on, you know, my personal experience with the trust, but I appreciate, I mean, as far as my, you know, the big and my son, but I think because me, I'm trusting as a person, and I'm open to that. You know, I already know what a program was capable of, because I've heard about it, but as far as, you know, speaking on behalf of maybe the Navajo Nation and children, other children that are here on the Navajo Nation, I'm speaking in that sense, or maybe why families, maybe some barriers that families would face that are more traditional than my home is. And so I just wanted to give a little bit of that insight and speak about that subject that exists here. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Namba, for your vulnerability, for sharing, and your the vulnerability that you shared. I think we all heard you and felt the pain, but through that pain, Roberto, you've taught me so much about the concept of thriving, and Namba, you mentioned that, right, is sometimes through those challenges is this concept of thriving in those communities. And so, Roberto, I'd like this to be our last question of the evening before we end for our panel, but I do want to talk about this concept of thriving communities, because that's what Big Brothers Big Sisters and this Jedi-focused youth empowerment, I won't call it a concept, but a foundation of who we are is about. And so can you share for our audience very briefly, when we talk about thriving, what does that mean to thrive? How do we get to that place to thrive in communities and build strategies for our underrepresented, marginalized community members to know that there is a path forward, that there is light, and that Big Brothers Big Sisters is a part of that thriving concept?
Yeah, thank you so much. And that's, you know, again, thank you everyone for sharing your wisdom and your insight. And, you know, I guess I've just kind of come to a place personally where I realize that, you know, thriving is not something that's going to be achieved by some program or even some initiative or some organization. You know, if I had more time, I would share, you know, just some of the work that we've done in Chicago and, you know, some of the things that the young people here in the inner city have witnessed, you know, and yet these young folks, you know, have persisted and been tremendously resilient. And yet, you know, with the support of mentors and programs, you know, there's these larger policies and procedures that say, well, you know, we don't care about the mental and social emotional support of youth. We gotta get these test scores, and we're gonna cut all this stuff. And so I've come to the realization that we need a shift from a program to a paradigm. And you know what Namba is saying just so deeply resonates with me personally and professionally. You know, what Becky said is continue to be curious I love you say this all the time, Tanya. To do this work well, we have to all be lifelong learners. We have to be in relationship. I love what you said, Dennis. You know, it's not just the things that we do that work, but the things that don't work, and reflection and accountability. And so I love that Big Brothers Big Sisters is starting a movement of Jedi warriors who don't have it all figured out, but we're committed to getting better together. And so I'm excited to be on this journey with you all.
I love your closing remarks, Roberto. I want to give just maybe a 30-second call for each of our remaining panelists, just for your final remarks for our audience. What would you like them to come away with? A key takeaway, a call to action. And so, Becky, let's start with you, and then Dennis, and we'll finish out with Namba. Becky, what would you like us to hear from you?
Well, I would just like to say to everyone, this journey is critical, and it is it's hard. And in St. Louis, we are doing our work led by our staff of color, our leadership team, and please reach out to us. We will share anything and everything that we can. You know, the good and the struggles. We just want to be a resource for all our colleagues.
Thank you. And Dennis, what would you like to share with our audience?
Well, kind of following on to what Becky said, you know, we're probably not at the stage that her agency is at. That's where I aspire to be. We're just starting out on this journey, and but we do have a great staff that is committed to it. And you know, one of the things that we talk a lot about, this being Pride Month and everything, is that there's such a wide range of people who have been marginalized, you know, including the LGBTQ population. So, you know, we're fortunate to have a diverse population here. But again, being intentional on who you look to hire and who you bring in by letting them know this is our mission and this is what we aspire to. It's not just about making a match, about putting two people together, but it goes beyond that, and it's much broader. And I love what Roberto said about the way we measure success is, you know, I think that's something that I'm glad to hear that I think our national organization has a committee in the NLC that's looking into the outcomes and how we measure them, because social emotional learning is so important. But I would just say, you know, as we've talked about, it's important to listen. It's important to learn. Namba said it well, from those who have experienced serious trauma or can use assistance. And for us to come from a place of empathy. And when we do that, you know, if you seriously listen and learn about the experiences and what people are going through, to gain a better understanding of it, not to think that you already know, but to really hear it and think how you would feel if you were in that position or you had experienced that trauma, to then realize that if you come from a place of empathy, you not only can help them and treat them better, but advocate on their behalf.
Well said, my friend. And Namba, what are your final thoughts and remarks for our audience?
Thank you very much. What I want to just say is to each and every one of you and everybody across the Big Brothers Big Sisters program, and representing the everyone that contributes and to the benefit for me and my child, to help me and then help me to help my child to be a good I don't know how to say it, excuse me, but I'm really looking forward to how he comes out of this, what he takes from having a big brother and having that lifelong relationship and the memories that he's going to have. And I really I'm so excited to see everything that he benefits from this program. And having the littles in mind whenever you're doing your work and whenever you're doing your outreach, it's just so wonderful. And I really appreciate that you've given me an opportunity to be a voice for myself, my son, my family, my relatives, my community, my nation, and other nations, other indigenous tribes across the United States, you know, and I thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak and to share personal experiences and personal my personal thoughts. So thank you very much. I'm so glad and honored to be a part of this.
Well, thank you. In my closing remarks, of course, I want to thank each of the invited panelists to this conversation. You have warmed my heart. I will be stewards of the knowledge that you have imparted upon me, and I know for certain, I can speak for our attendees listening to this conversation, that they also have learned, they've heard, affirmed, and we will move forward bigger together because of each of you imparting your experiences and perspectives. Individually and collectively, thank you, Namba. Thank you, Dennis, Roberto, Becky, our audience members and panelists. Thank you so much for this conversation. It's been a joy, humbling, and honored to have been able to hear from all of you today. Let's keep our movement of Jedi going. As Roberto said, let's all become Jedi warriors in our own right. It's a marathon, not a sprint. We all have a different place in our journey, but we are all moving on our path forward bigger together. Thank you all for joining us in this discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gracias.